the Bible is the standard for evaluating everything, including our own research results. In the NCD paradigm, research functions as a heuristic principle, so to speak. You find out something, not as a norm. It's something descriptive, not something prescriptive. Once you have identified many features empirically as growth factors, you have to evaluate them in the light of biblical truth, and only those features that pass this Bible test will be included in the NCD toolbox. But the interesting thing is that in our research in more than 45,000 churches and 70 countries, we couldn't identify any feature as a growth factor that is in tension or contradicts biblical truth. Just on the contrary, every single feature that we identified as a growth factor is a clear biblical principle. Well, there are a number of people who have difficulty with the relationship between the empirical dimension and the biblical authority within the NCD paradigm. And sometimes people tell me, but in the very beginning, when you developed your first list of questions to evaluate the quality of a healthy church, you certainly started with a biblical list, didn't you? And may I say, no, we did not start with a biblical list. Listen, we did not start with a biblical list. Why not? Let me give you the background. If we want to start with a so-called biblical list, before we had done any research, our only option would be to start with our own understanding of the Bible, which is highly subjective, which has been influenced by our own theological tradition, by our own spiritual style, by our own spiritual paradigm, by the people that we have met, by the professors that have taught us, and so on and so forth. And there's no sin in that. Hundreds of Christians have done this throughout church history and have published their books featuring the signs of a healthy or of the true church, or the signs of growing churches. Well, you can do that. And then as a second step, you develop a questionnaire that tests exactly those features that you beforehand have defined as qualities of a healthy church, and that test these qualities. And then as a third step, you utilize this questionnaire, and you will find out, what a surprise, that churches that exactly reflect those features that you have defined according to your biblical understanding will have a high quality. Hallelujah. And these are exactly the qualities that you have developed beforehand. That is really circular reasoning of the worst kind. You cannot prove anything by this approach. And yet I have found this approach again and again, not necessarily in the area of so-called biblical lists, in inverted commas, but there are quite a number of movements or models within Christianity that have developed questionnaires that test exactly those features that this specific model values highly, and those churches that live in accordance with these values get a high quality score. And these are exactly the features that this model feature. So you cannot prove anything by this. When you study how we in NCD deal with the Bible, for instance by studying the NCD tools, you probably will discover that we work hard to reflect the whole biblical truth, rather than just focusing on one biblical aspect or one Bible verse that we put into the center of our universe. The Bible is thick. You find a lot of things in the Bible that are not in contradiction with each other, but sometimes they are in tension with each other. They are developments. And only if you put those different aspects of a certain feature that you find in the Bible together, you find, or you come closer to the biblical truth. You cannot prove anything biblically by, making a certain statement and then in brackets you place one or two Bible verses, and usually in those Bible verses you find the same wording that you use in your own statement, and that's a biblical proof. There are many Christians are so accustomed to this procedure that they believe that this is a very solid, very deep biblical procedure. Well, I would have questions about this. If you want to prove something biblically, you really have to research the whole Bible, literally from Genesis to Revelations 22, and see what are the biblical principles behind this whole book. And that is what we try to do in NCD. It's an interesting thing when you study church history, especially with regard to heresies, that what makes up a heresy is very often not the opposite of the truth, but in most cases it's something far more delicate. It's a partial truth. It's something biblical in most cases. So most heresies are biblical, but they only look at one aspect of the Bible and position this partial truth against all the other aspects that you find in the Bible as well. And by applying this procedure, your partial truth will become a whole heresy. And that is a widespread trap. In NCD, we try and we work hard to overcome this trap. So you will find, when it comes to the Bible, again and again, what we like to call biblical balance.